and welcome to Geeking Out About It. I'm Kaylene.
I'm Cailin.
And I'm Austin.
And we're so excited to be here once again with the exciting conclusion to our Winter of Heroes event. And what a fitting conclusion it is. The reason we named the series the Winter of Heroes in the first place is due to the marketing plot by Disney a few summers ago called Summer of Heroes, where they really leaned into their superhero lineup in Disney's California adventure. This was before Avengers Campus. And now we're here to talk about those very same heroes and the multitudes of movies, games, and shows they're featured in.
That's right. And we are concluding this series by talking about Marvel, including the MCU. But we'll get to that later. If you missed our last two episodes, be sure to check out our content about the history of comic books and our focus episode on DC and their media adaptations.
Now, as mentioned, the bulk of this episode will be focused on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But before we get into that, there's some pretty cool stuff that happened before and outside of the MCU that we want to tell you about as well. Starting off with animated TV, which is a pretty important medium for superhero stories, since the larger-than-life comic book action translates well into an animated format.
Much like DC, Marvel was quick to jump on the trend of animation. Their first attempt at the medium, simply titled The Marvel Superheroes, aired all the way back in 1966, and it starred a collection of familiar faces including Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America. In 1992, Marvel would release its most successful animated series yet, XMen. The original XMen series ran for 5 seasons and vastly increased the popularity of the team.
Much like their main competitor, Marvel found quite a lot of success adapting their comics, revolving around superhero teams such as the XMen and the Fantastic Four. In particular, these types of stories with multiple main characters tend to work better for a series because of the potential for interesting character dynamics across the main cast. That being said, Marvel was able to find consistent success from the beginning through one of their most popular characters, Spider-Man. Nearly 1/5 of Marvel's animated TV shows have starred our favorite web slinger as a title character.
During the early 2000s, we would see an influx of shows starring the cast of Marvel heroes we were most familiar with. Iron Man himself would receive a handful of standalone shows, as well as appear in the multiple animated Avengers series, which aired a few years prior to the MCU cinematic event. As the MCU gained popularity, Marvel began to focus their media pertaining to the cast of the Avengers on their live-action productions. This meant that as a whole, Marvel has released less animated TV series in recent years. Most of the recent content has been about non-Avenger characters, such as the Guardians of the Galaxy series, which aired in 2015 and ran for 3 seasons, or Marvel comics that are not affiliated with the Great or Marvel continuity at all, like 2017's Big Hero 6, the series, or 2021's Hit Monkey. The primary exception to this is the only animated piece of media incorporated into the MCU, Marvel's What If, but we'll get to that.
Now in our DC episode, we had plenty of time to talk about all the different live-action TV shows and movies that DC has released over the years, but Marvel is a bit different, since a lot of their licenses go different places and everyone kind of owns everything, but now Marvel owns everything. It's kind of a lot. But we have a couple honorable mentions that we want to talk about just before we get into the whole MCU entirely. The first and most importantly probably being the X-Men series. Now the X-Men came out in the early 2000s, and that's what we defined in our cinematic episode as like the comic book episode as the beginning of the cinematic era of comics. Now X-Men came out and they came out with a good chunk of films, and then they came out with newer ones that like altered the old ones with timelines and all these kind of crazy things, and it got kind of messy.
Yeah, that's a later invention, though. But in the original 2000s X-Men, it was the simple sequel, straightforward 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
And then because of the MCU and all the complexity that was added into superhero movies, they would later come back and influence it. But we don't really need to talk about Apocalypse too much or Days of Future Past. Those are all pretty good, but really the best of the new X-Men movies is Logan, which is the conclusion to Wolverine's story in one possible timeline, where he's an old man who's sort of losing his powers due to the adamantium poisoning in his blood. And it's a really good story and a great conclusion for the character. And it is Hugh Jackman's final appearance as Wolverine, assuming that Disney doesn't have him come back for an Avengers crossover, which he already said he would do if they actually did that. But they probably won't, because that would put them in a corner as far as that character is concerned.
Yeah.
We should move on, though, to a video game that's very important to talk about, which is the Spider-Man video game made by Insomniac for the PS4 and PS5. There are 2, the Spider-Man game and the Spider-Man Miles Morales game. They are absolutely incredible. The combat mechanics are great. They're very Arkham-esque. The swinging mechanics are very fun, and it is my brother's absolute favorite version of Spider-Man, the Spider-Man shown in Insomniac. He quips right, he acts right, he's got the morals down, he's poor, it's awesome.
Very nice. Now, not just video games, but we also have the Netflix shows to talk about, which these are like 4 Netflix one-off shows, including Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, and Iron Fist, that all released on Netflix and kind of wanted to make their own not MCU, but their own universe once Netflix got those properties. And then they also came out with a combo show called The Defenders. Most notably out of those ones would be Daredevil. And we're already kind of seeing that come into the MCU, but we'll kind of talk about that later. And the other shows were good too, but
well,
Netflix,
most of them.
Yeah.
Luke Cage was really good. Jessica Jones was okay. Iron Fist, not amazing. Don't put a green filter over
Netflix did their best, but not enough.
Yeah, green color filter, bad idea. But there is one place where it's used very well, and it's when you're defining villains or doing any kind of glitch work, which is a great segue into the next thing we need to talk about, which is the Spider-Verse. So the Spider-Verse, or Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, as it's known, is a great movie. It's animated, made by Columbia. It doesn't actually have anything to do with Marvel Studios, which is owned by Disney. And it features Miles Morales, who is the younger sort of protege of Spider-Man, sort of coming into his own, becoming Spider-Man, as it were. And it shows the first of the major Spider-Man inter-universe crossover events, but more of that later.
Another thing to talk about is the Sam Raimi Spider-Verse, or Spider-Man movie
Sort of a
trilogy.
Spider-Verse.
It's kind of a Spider-Verse, which came out in the early 2000s, which again kind of came out around the time as X-Men kind of bringing the superheroes onto the big screen that hadn't been seen before. This was the first live-action adaptation of Spider-Man that really kind of grabbed audiences' attention. My personal favorite Spider-Man, I would say. And I feel like those movies are like definitely staples. Like I think those are when people decided they were like, superheroes are cool. I like Spider-Man. I'm gonna watch all 3 of these movies.
Yeah, and it is worth mentioning that Spider-Man's, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies, as well as the X-Men movies, really did drive superheroes forward into the cinematic age. However, the most interesting thing I think is because of Marvel's failing financial security at that time, they had to sell off a lot of their characters, which is why the Spider-Man movies, specifically these ones first, are owned by Sony and by extension Columbia Pictures, not by Marvel and Disney anymore. So they actually have to contract out whenever they want to use any of those characters. The same thing sort of existed with X-Men and Fantastic Four for a while, except for they were sold to Fox, which Disney later acquired, which means they did get the rights back in a roundabout way by buying out the company that Marvel had sold them to. But for a long time, Marvel did not have access to any of those properties, and they still don't own Spider-Man again. Sony is holding on to that one, probably because he's one of the most profitable characters that there is. But that is why the MCU features the Avengers. They're actually not the most popular Marvel set of characters, but we think of them as they are now because of how revolutionary the MCU is. But really, it's because they didn't have anything else to work with, so they had to work with their B-list and their C-list characters, which is why we got Iron Man.
And now they're some of the most popular ones that you think about.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things, at least.
Okay, enough of that. Now let's actually talk about what we're here for, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, before we begin, it should go without saying that we will be talking about and spoiling all 4 phases of the MCU, including Avengers Endgame. If you haven't seen them, go and watch them, then come back and watch this video.
Marvel Studios has seen the success of their characters at companies like Fox and Sony, and they felt they needed to hop on the superhero trend. Kevin Feige envisioned creating a shared universe, just as creators Stan Lee and Jack Kirby had done with their comic books in the early 1960s, but this time on the big screen. Marvel's plan was to release individual films for their main characters and then merge them into a crossover film. Feige referred to the shared narrative of the continuity of these films as the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or MCU. Marvel designated the MCU as Earth 1999999 within the continuity of the company's comic book universe. Now this is a collection of fictional alternate universes. The MCU of today is broken up into 4 phases, but we'll be talking about all of them.
Phase 1 allowed Kevin Feige's vision to become a reality with the release of Iron Man in 2008. Tony Stark, as he describes himself in the first Avengers film, is a genius, billionaire, playboy philanthropist who has an ego that tends to get him into interesting situations. In his debut film, we learn about the origins of how the man, Tony Stark, becomes the hero, Iron Man. This is a good place to note that the films in the Phase 1 of the MCU are origin stories of the main recurring characters for the rest of the phase.
The next film released was The Incredible Hulk, which was released 1 month after Iron Man. The Incredible Hulk is about Bruce Banner, a scientist with 7 PhDs, becomes a pawn in a military scheme to reinvigorate the super soldier program through gamma radiation. The relationship between Bruce Banner and the Hulk is very similar to Jekyll and Hyde, if you've heard that story. Banner is able to turn into the Hulk whenever he gets angry. It should be noted that in this film, Bruce is played by Edward Norton, but due to contracts and other issues, he is replaced by Mark Ruffalo and for the remainder of the MCU adaptations of the Hulk.
The third film to be released by Marvel Studios was Iron Man 2. Other than the introduction of Black Widow and the connection to the organization of S.H.I.E.L.D., not much could be said about this film other than it furthers Tony Stark's narrative going forward in the MCU. We do get more side character development with reoccurring characters like James Rhodes, aka Rhodey, who in this film becomes Iron Man's friend in combat, War Machine. We also see Happy Hogan and Pepper Potts returning in this film as friends of Tony Stark, who do their best to keep him in line.
And before we get any further, we should actually talk about this because you mentioned Mark Ruffalo replaces Edward Norton, and in this one, between the difference of Iron Man and Iron Man 2, Terrence Howard, who plays Rhodey in the first movie, is replaced by Don Cheadle. And I will say that I didn't actually like Don Cheadle at the very beginning when he was replaced. I missed the original performance, but he grows on you.
In 2011, Thor was released. Thor is the Norse god of thunder and the son of Odin. In the movie, Thor reignites an ancient war, and as punishment, he is banished from Asgard to Earth and stripped of his powers and his hammer, Mjolnir.
Be yours once I reclaim Mjolnir.
Mjolnir? What's Mjolnir?
As his brother Loki plots to take the Asgardian throne, Thor must prove himself worthy. Another important character to introduce from this film is Loki, Thor's adopted brother and the god of mischief. The brotherly love between Thor and Loki is one that is dynamic and always changing, but they are an inseparable duo nonetheless. Loki shows up throughout the MCU going forward.
Captain America: The First Avenger, also released in 2011, takes place during World War II. Steve Rogers is a frail man from Brooklyn who gets transformed into the super soldier known as Captain America and must stop the Red Skull from using the Tesseract as an energy source for world domination. Both Thor and Captain America are both very pivotal movies for the MCU. They were both the last films to be released before Avengers, so they had to do the most in terms of setting up the story. Like Thor, the first Avenger introduced many characters and objects that would be seen again throughout the MCU. The most notable include Roger's best friend, Bucky Barnes, Howard Stark, which technically was introduced in Iron Man 2, but he gets more development here.
All the stories from these films would eventually be connected in the Avengers movie released in 2012. In the film, Nick Fury and the spy agency S.H.I.E.L.D. recruit Tony Stark, Steve Rogers, Bruce Banner, Thor, and S.H.I.E.L.D. agents Natasha Romanoff, aka Black Widow, and Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye, to form a team capable of stopping Thor's brother Loki from subjugating Earth. The final battle scene, referred to as the Battle of New York, would be referenced in the MCU indefinitely, as it set the tone for the future of superhero films they would be releasing for years to come.
Similarly to how Phase 1 started, Phase 2 begins with the release of Iron Man 3, the last movie to be released in the Iron Man trilogy. Iron Man 3 takes place right after the Battle of New York, and we get to see how Tony Stark was affected by the battle and now suffering from PTSD. The main big bad in this movie is a man named Aldrich Killian, who is posing as the leader of the Ten Rings, the Mandarin. The only reason to really mention this is that the real Mandarin eventually shows up in the MCU.
And he's not named after a chicken dish.
The second film to be released under the Phase 2 umbrella was Thor: The Dark World. Now, most likely if you've talked to a Marvel fan, chances are they told you this is their least favorite film, for one reason or another. However, the film, while wanting to be forgotten by fans, is very important to the plot of Endgame, which would come out close to a decade later. Just showing that even if Marvel misses the target on a specific movie, they can still use enough of it to connect to the greater story being told.
Next to be released was Captain America: The Winter Soldier. In this film, Captain America joins forces with fellow Avenger Black Widow and his newfound pal Sam Wilson, aka the Falcon, to uncover a conspiracy within the spy agency S.H.I.E.L.D. while facing a mysterious assassin known as the Winter Soldier. Spoiler alert, this is Cap's childhood bestie Bucky Barnes. This movie is a perfect cross between superhero action and spy movie espionage. Even though being tucked into its own little movie sort of isolates it, this film still affects the greater MCU in a big way. By revealing that Hydra has been existing inside S.H.I.E.L.D. for so long, this really sets up the tension between the Avengers and the people they once trusted.
With Phase 2, Marvel decided that they needed to expand their universe, so they decided to take the MCU to space by introducing the Guardians of the Galaxy in a movie of the same name. The Guardians are a team of misfits who all meet when they are trying to earn a few extra bucks. The team includes Peter Quill, aka Star-Lord, who is a human from Earth with daddy issues, Gamora, who is a space assassin, whose adopted father is Thanos, the Mad Titan, Drax the Destroyer, who, well, is a destroyer. He has it out for the Mad Titan and stumbles into the group because he needs Gamora to get to Thanos. The team also includes the bounty hunting duo of Rocket Raccoon, a cybernetically modified raccoon Rocket, and the tree-like humanoid Groot. Other characters that get introduced are Ronan the Accuser, who is working for Thanos, and Yondu, a Ravager who will show up again in the next Guardian film. What makes the first Guardians film unique is that it showed the vastness of space in the MCU. For the most part, we've only seen Asgard and the few places Thor has traveled to, but the universe is much larger than we know it to be.
I mean, I don't think that's the only thing that makes the Guardians unique. Real quick aside for everybody here, I think what makes the Guardians so unique is that it does a really good ensemble piece while introducing every character individually and shows that it can be done if you're not DC.
In 2015, Marvel released their second Avengers film, Avengers Age of Ultron. This movie introduced many new characters to the MCU and gave the characters more conflicts to deal with. While trying to snuff out the last of the Hydra bases, the Avengers locate Loki's scepter that was confiscated after the Battle of New York. Von Strucker, a Hydra devotee, was using the scepter to perform human experiments. His surviving test subjects, Pietro and Wanda Maximoff, were used as weapons to fight against the Avengers at first, and then they decided to help them. Ultron, the antagonist of the film, is an artificially intelligent being who is made by Bruce Banner and Tony Stark to help better protect the Earth from the outside threats that they faced, like in the Battle of New York. Unfortunately for Stark and Banner, Ultron becomes sentient and decides he has to wipe out humanity in order to save it. The creation of Ultron also led to the creation of Vision, who is the humanoid form of Ultron, but with the voice of Jarvis, Tony Stark's AI, and the power from Thor's hammer. The events of Age of Ultron put the Avengers in hot water for once, as they are finally eventually going to be held accountable for their actions.
It should be added that one of the reasons Vision is so important going forward is he has the Mind Stone in his head, which turns out to have been in Loki's scepter, which is a little bit confusing. But it sets up the Infinity Stones as being really important going into the next phase. And there's actually a whole scene with Thor in a mystic pool getting visions going, finding out what's going on with Infinity Stones. And it really sets up Phase 3 for it going forward. But it's actually not technically the end of Phase 2. There's still one more.
The last film to be released in Phase 2 is AntMan, a movie that takes place on a much smaller scale than the movie released before it. AntMan introduces Scott Lang, an ex-convict who is really good at stealing for the right reasons, Hank Pym, an ex-S.H.I.E.L.D. scientist with advanced technology, and his daughter, Hope Van Dyne, as the main character for this film. In the film, Lang must help defend Pym's AntMan shrinking technology and plot a heist with worldwide ramifications. The movie was a nice change of pace from the high stakes of the previous Phase 2 movies.
Phase 2 overall could be said as more of an experimental stage for Marvel and their characters, but many cool storylines and fan favorites came out of it.
Now I hope you didn't forget where we are, because picking up shortly after the events of Age of Ultron, Phase 3 of the MCU starts off with Captain America: Civil War. Civil War follows the Avengers reacting to the Sokovia Accords, a piece of legislation introduced by the UN that would require our heroes to only act when approved by the government. Cap is strongly against these regulations after seeing how easily governments can be corrupted in the Winter Soldier, while Tony advocates for more oversight after feeling the guilt of the collateral damage caused over the years by the team. This division quickly spreads throughout the entire team, creating two factions, Team Cap and Team Tony. Tony even recruits a 16-year-old Peter Parker to join him by his side, giving Tom Holland his first appearance as Spider-Man in the MCU.
Civil War also introduces the character of T'Challa, aka Black Panther. He's the Prince of Wakanda who takes the mantle of king after his father is killed in a bombing at the United Nations, which there's a whole misunderstanding about that, which applies to the plot of Civil War. But eventually, Civil War culminates as the Avengers disband and our heroes go their separate ways until another threat emerges. But more on that later.
Following Civil War, the next movie in the MCU is Doctor Strange. Benedict Cumberbatch plays Stephen Strange, an arrogant, overconfident neurosurgeon who suffers irreparable nerve damage to his hands after a near-fatal car accident. This accident leads Strange on a quest to find a cure, eventually leading him across the world to Kamar Taj, where he meets the Ancient One and begins studying the mystic arts. Doctor Strange then spends months dedicating to mastering these mystic arts.
Following Doctor Strange is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. If you enjoyed the first one, you'll most likely enjoy the second one as well. However, it doesn't have a massive impact on the MCU as a whole, so we'll move on to our next entry.
No. We may not have a massive impact on all the MCU continuity, but we can't move on without mentioning Michael Rooker's excellent performance as Yondu. I mean, he's Mary Poppins, y'all. All right, next up is Spider-Man Homecoming, which takes place 6 months after the end of Civil War. This is Tom Holland's first solo movie as Peter Parker, and it features a lot of character development for Peter Parker as he tries to balance his high school life with his newfound identity as Spider-Man. A major theme of this movie is identity. As Peter Parker tries to establish himself as a hero under the watchful eye of his mentor, Tony Stark, Peter eventually has to go it alone and take on the Vulture to stop him from stealing a plane full of artifacts and technology from Avengers Tower.
Following Homecoming is Thor Ragnarok, which was directed by Taika Waititi. This movie represents a huge tonal shift from the previous two Thor movies. It's a lighthearted, colorful, explosive action-adventure from start to finish. After the death of Odin, Thor and Loki face a new threat in Hela, the goddess of death and Thor's long-lost older sister. The two brothers end up getting banished to Sakaar, a mysterious junk planet at the far edge of the universe, ruled by the eccentric Grandmaster, who is excellently played by the amazing Jeff Goldblum. While Loki lives it up in a life of luxury, Thor is captured and entered into a gladiator arena where he is soon reunited with the one and only Hulk, who, if you remember, disappeared in a stolen Quinjet at the end of Age of Ultron. Thor, Loki, and the gang return to Asgard to fight Hela and prevent the end of all days. And while Asgard is ultimately destroyed, the Asgardians end the movie on a ship in search of a new homeworld.
After Ragnarok came Black Panther. This movie was a massive cultural landmark as it was the first major superhero blockbuster to feature a black main character and supporting cast. Even though Wakanda is a fictional nation, this movie still serves as a celebration of African culture, which can clearly be seen in the set design, costumes, and world building of the movie. Black Panther may not have brought a massive paradigm shift to ongoing story of the MCU, but its cultural significance cannot be overstated. Chadwick Boseman's performance as King T'Challa has and will continue to be an inspiration for marginalized groups who have gone without representation for far too long. Sadly, Chadwick Boseman lost his battle with colon cancer in August of 2020, but his legacy, especially in the MCU, will live on forever.
Now it's time for the big guns, Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. Released in 2018 and 2019 respectively, these two films stand as perhaps one of the biggest cinematic events in recent history, like on the level of Luke, I am your father in Star Wars important. Infinity War is centered around Thanos, the Mad Titan, as he travels the cosmos in search of the 6 Infinity Stones for one purpose: to erase half of all sentient life in the universe at random. Naturally, our heroes catch wind of this and band together to make a desperate last stand to save countless lives. This leads to numerous huge crossovers as characters from all over the Marvel universe meet each other for the first time. Thor teams up with the Guardians of the Galaxy, Doctor Strange and Wong fight alongside Iron Man and the Hulk, and that's just in the first 20 minutes. Despite the best efforts of everyone, however, Thanos successfully acquires all 6 Infinity Stones, and with a snap of his fingers, half of the universe begins to disintegrate into nothingness, which must surely have traumatized a lot of young Spider-Man fans in the audience.
After the devastating cliffhanger ending of Infinity War, fans were forced to wait for 1 year in order to see the final resolution in Avengers Endgame. And yeah, Ant-Man and the Wasp and Captain Marvel were released during the gap, but come on, they're not the Avengers.
We need to know what happened.
Avengers Endgame picks up roughly 5 years after Thanos snapped away half of the universe after a rat inadvertently frees Scott Lang from the quantum realm. He seeks out the rest of the remaining Avengers in order to find out
what the hell happened here.
While the loss to Thanos was devastating, many of the heroes had moved forward with their lives, regardless. The Infinity Stones were destroyed shortly after Thanos won. Tony is raising a daughter with Pepper, while Thor is busy grinding in Fortnite in New Asgard, located in Norway. Scott is still left with questions since his 5 years in the quantum realm only felt like a mere 5 hours. He brings up the idea of using the quantum realm to travel back in time. Tony immediately laughs this idea off as ridiculous of a fantasy it is, before solving it literally that same night. Thus, the time heist starts. 3 teams of heroes are sent to different places and times in order to collect the Infinity Stones from their past selves and bring everyone back who disappeared. The teams travel back to iconic locations from previous MCU films: Manhattan during the Battle of New York, Asgard in 2013, and Vormir, the location of the Soul Stone. Our heroes return with all 6 Infinity Stones and a new Iron Gauntlet, which Bruce Banner uses to snap his fingers and bring back all the fallen heroes and everyone else who got snapped.
Unfortunately, due to some cyborg shenanigans with Nebula, Thanos from 2014 time travels to 2023 with a new plan to destroy the entire universe and start from scratch. This leads into one of, if not the largest scale battle ever to be seen in a comic book movie adaptation. Like, the entire last 30 minutes of this movie is just this massive battle. Seeing this in a theater when it first came out was an experience unlike any other. There was an electric feeling in the air, watching all the portals open up, seeing Cap finally wield Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, and all the way to Tony Stark's ultimate sacrifice.
Avengers Endgame represented the conclusion to more than 10 years and nearly 20 films of interconnected storytelling. And while it does serve as a great conclusion, the MCU shows no signs of slowing down anytime soon.
Now, while Endgame feels like the ultimate stopping point for our conversation, the MCU machine still moves forward. Spider-Man Far From Home is the technical end of Phase 3 and the transition onto Phase 4, which kicks off with a ton of awesome Disney Plus shows. Actually, Disney Plus has been a big part of Phase 4. Marvel has been spending more time on select characters by featuring them in their own series, while at the same time developing people who had been previously seen as side characters. This took the form of standalone shows like Loki, Hawkeye, and even Falcon and Winter Soldier got their own series. This was a win-win for fans. Not only was Marvel able to give fans more content, but we also got to see these characters in a way we hadn't seen before, especially in the case of Loki.
Phase 4 was kicked off with WandaVision, which we have already covered on Geeking Out About It in the past. So if you want more details about the mind-boggling show, make sure to check that out. As for the big screen, Black Widow was released to add a backstory taking place just after Civil War, and marked a return to cinemas after a 2-year absence due to COVID-19. Shang-Chi and the Eternals released shortly after, introducing us to some new faces in the MCU.
Well, not just introducing us to some new faces, though. I would say primarily proving that Marvel is absolutely genius, because they managed to turn Shang-Chi, which otherwise was a pretty racist caricature of a Chinese martial artist, into an amazing character with one of the best MCU movies ever made. And he was nothing. He was D or F tier character, and now he's A in my book.
As we mentioned earlier in the show, Marvel then experimented with the multiverse in an animated show called What If, where they took normal scenarios that we've seen in the MCU, like Steve Rogers becoming Captain America, and put slight twists on it, like what if Peggy Carter became Captain America? Things like that were just slightly different than the original story that could create a whole new timeline and plot.
This influx of new Marvel content proved to be incredibly successful. At the end of 2021, Disney Plus had 129.8 million paying customers worldwide, gaining 11.8 million for the quarter ended of January 1st, 2022. Considering that both What If and Hawkeye premiered around this time, it should prove to Disney that fans are engaging with this kind of content.
All this is a lot, and it's getting even bigger than we expected. Spider-Man No Way Home is a defining film for Phase 4 up to this point, so we definitely recommend checking that out. Surprisingly, there's even more that we haven't mentioned. There are unreleased movies and shows that are yet to come out. The closest to release is Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, which will then be followed up by Thor, Love and Thunder, Moon Knight, Black Panther 2, Guardians of the Galaxy 3, a new Blade movie, The Marvels, Quantumania, Secret Invasion, She-Hulk, and finally a new chance for the Fantastic Four. That is a lot.
So many, oh my gosh.
Unfortunately, though, that is all the time we have for tonight's episode. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you check out the rest of KBVR TV's awesome content on our YouTube page, including the rest of our Winter of Heroes content covering the history of comic books and DC's media adaptations. You can also check out our companion content on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitch. From Geeking Out About It, I have been Austin.
I'm Kaylene.
I'm Kaylin.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you.